What do we do? How can we change the system? Let's just say, what can the average person do, and then what can Congress do, or what can a president do?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of things that the average person can do, and I really like that you started with that question because I think we're on a lot of these like monopoly issues. We're too quick to sort of defer responsibility to elected officials. I think we don't take enough responsibility for ourselves in doing the things that we can do to at least bring the issue into the mainstream. So I think when it comes to the elite colleges, there are a lot of things that people can do. One of the things is, I mentioned how there's this price fixing lawsuit that's making its way through courts. Well, just like how after the 1990s, elite colleges went to Congress and said, write us an exemption. They've done basically something similar this time around, which is, their antitrust exemption just lapsed in September, and from what I've heard, they're trying to resurrect an antitrust exemption on Capitol Hill. I've started a petition. You can find it on breakthecartel.com about this exact exemption. It's called Section 568 of the Improving America's Schools Act. It should not be resurrected. It should not be reinstituted. We don't need elite colleges to have more market power, to have more leeway, to collude and fix prices. We don't need that. I mean, prices are already too high. This is like the bare minimum is like, we don't need to be making things worse, right? I think this is an area where people can get involved. It's a public policy debate that's happening right now on Capitol Hill. I think very few normal people know about it. This is something that I would like to see more elected officials speak on as we come to the election in November. If that's something that anyone who's listening to this now or anyone else is interested in, you can find more information about that at breakthecartel.com. I think that's a very common sense thing that everyone should be looking at. In terms of how we fix this broader monopoly, I have a couple of solutions. First, I think we need to nationalize the ranking system. President Obama tried to start a national rankings system. It got killed by lobbying, and sort of the Department of Education bent the knee to all the pressure that came in from the elite colleges. Didn't do anything on it. I think we need to take a very, very strong stance this time and not budge. We need to nationalize the rankings. What we have right now is basically a cartel that's orchestrated by U.S. News. It should not be U.S. News that is setting, quantities and creating scarcity in our system. It should be the government that is doing things in the public interest and is directly accountable to the public. And so I think a very straightforward solution would be the U.S. News should just get bought out by the federal government, by the Department of Education. They should take a very specific look at the criteria, all the things that incentivize scarcity. So less seats, more spending. We should invert those exactly, right? So things like selectivity measures, things like endowment per student. Anything with student on the denominator that needs to get inverted, because obviously the number one way to jack up those metrics is to just let in less students, teach less students. So all of that stuff, I think, very straightforward. The government could buy it for like hundreds of millions of dollars and could immediately, by changing some of that criteria, generate billions and billions and billions of dollars of surplus for the American public. It's a no-brainer investment. I think we should do that. I also think, harkening back to what you were saying about this earlier era of trust busting, I think we need to break up some of these endowments. They've gotten too big. It's created this weird, distorted market, a weird, distorted field where basically now no one can come in and compete with the established elite colleges. It's just become too expensive for them to be able to do so. In an earlier era, during the Gilded Age, if you're super rich, the thing to do was to start a university. That's how we got Stanford and U Chicago, which was formed by Rockefeller. So we got Vanderbilt. How we got all of these subsidiary schools that joined the elite colleges that weren't the original Harvard or Yale or anything like that. But they, I think, added a lot of good competition, a lot of opportunity in that market, and have been sort of this model. But ever since basically the year 1900, we've seen no one new come in and really enter that elite echelon. And the reason is because like the barriers to entry have gotten so high. One of the barriers to entry is these massive endowments. No one can compete with a school with $50 billion just sitting in a piggy bank. I think we need to break up those endowments, and what we ought to be thinking to do is, take chunks of like $10 billion and give it to existing public colleges, not Berkeley or UVA, but other schools in other parts of the country, to create new elite colleges that can meaningfully compete with the Ivy League, with Stanford, with U Chicago, with Duke. We should do these in all over the country, and by doing that, we can actually reinvigorate sort of price competition in this market, because all of a sudden now you have really well-resourced people on a level playing field, who are going to be going after students in a much more meritorious way. They're going to be trying to offer students the best deals. It's going to completely reshape what happens in elite education today. I think number three, what we need to be looking at is publicizing pricing. The weird thing about elite colleges is they're what I call a confusopoly. They confuse people with all these forms and what the actual price is, because you get the sticker price, and then there's financial aid, and then there's the price fluctuates over time, and no one really knows there are all these fees, and then there's like mandates that you have to get university housing, and so like what are you actually paying? No one knows. I think what we should be looking to do at all the elite colleges in particular, but colleges across the board, is you should have publicized pricing, which is like sort of like the income tax. In these graduated brackets, if your family makes between this and this is how much you're going to pay. If they make between this and this is exactly net. This is how much you're going to make. None of this dance about, oh, let me submit all this information to you so you can like gorge me on financial aid. That makes no sense, right? The other benefit of publicizing pricing in this way and making it this more transparent is that now when they try to like cannibalize, Pell Grants or tuition tax credits by increasing prices in specific brackets, it's going to be super obvious. And so that's going to be a check on some of the power of elite colleges to do these types of things that they've been getting away with for so long, because pricing is so opaque. No one actually knows what's being paid. And lastly, I think there ought to be endowment taxes on scarcity. So if you're not increasing the number of students that you're teaching year after year after year, I think there should be super punitive taxes that really change the calculus from scarcity to one of growth. I think that's what we need to be doing. There are more than enough very qualified, very talented students who are very desperate to go to elite colleges to fill these schools. There's plenty of cost efficiencies that these schools can find. There's so much that could be done. There's so much potential here. And it's just been stagnant because of this monopoly issue. I think if we break this monopoly, it will be some of the most productive years in elite higher education generally, that have ever been had. It's sort of like splitting the atom. It releases so much creative energy. And that's what I think we need to be thinking about. That's the direction I want to see this country going.
We had a point in chat that I think is just funny. It's saying that we don't want college tuition being determined like we're buying a car or a used car, where we're going in there, you see the sticker price, and then you go, the guy goes, oh yeah, you thought it was that, and then whoop, new contract. And I'm laughing while you're talking through this because, and this is going to lead into my next question, but because I go to Penn, you go to Columbia.
Yeah.
Like we are, I just did it. It's for grad school for me. It's for law school for you. It's a little bit different sometimes, I think, than undergrad, but it's pretty similar. It's in many ways, especially the sticker price. It's kind of like amorphous. So I'm laughing throughout that, just thinking about it. But there's not I guess there's not a great way of asking this, but I think it's a disingenuous question when people ask, because people would ask me the same thing for having you, I think, on to discuss this. But if there's all these flaws with these schools, why do you go to them? What is the value to them? And I just think it's important to have your viewpoint on this, just because it's not just like we're just crapping on colleges. We're not just crapping on higher end universities, but go ahead.
Yeah, this is actually a point I make super explicit in my book. One of my favorite moments in politics is in 1960, there was this presidential debate between John Kennedy and at that time, Vice President Richard Nixon. And Kennedy opens his statement by saying, I think we're a great country, but I think we can be a greater country. And I think we're a powerful country, but I think we can be a more powerful country. I'm not saying that there's nothing positive about the elite colleges. I'm saying that there can be way more that is positive about elite colleges. I mean, that's the ambition of America, is always striving for more perfection, even if we never achieve perfect. And so, I don't think like people ask me this, like, okay, well, if you think elite colleges are so monopolistic, why do you go to one? And the argument isn't that we should just burn these schools to the ground. The argument is that more people should go. More people should have the opportunity to go, and it should be cheaper for people to go. I'm saying like these are really good schools. We just need to swing open the door so more people can get access to these schools. It's sort of like, if you criticize, the big oil companies for jacking up prices or gouging you, and someone said, okay, well then why do you buy oil? Well, why do you buy
Why
gas?
do you drive a car?
Yeah. It's like I need to get to work. You know what I mean? And I think it's exactly what's happening here. But I'll tell you an anecdote that I think illustrates like how positive I actually am about these institutions. So when I was at Georgetown, one of the first days, I was in my dorm room with my roommate. We're playing Xbox, like Halo or something, hanging out. And my roommate just paused it and he goes, I have to go to this talk. I'm like, well, where are you going? This is like the third day. I have nothing going on. And he goes, well, there's a talk by this economist. I think it's like it's in the ICC. I'm going to go. I'm like, well, who's the economist? And he goes, it's George Akerlof. And I'm like, oh, I'll come with you, because I'd heard of this guy. I mean, I'd taken economics a little bit in high school, and this is like one of the famous names in all of economics. And so I go with my roommate. We sit down. There are very few people at this talk, and George Akerlof basically, almost in like sort of like a personal like lecture, tells us about like all these crazy cool ideas that he's working on as it relates to identity and how that intersects with the discipline of economics and all of these things that are sort of outside the mainstream, outside the consensus, these very contrarian ideas. And I just like am having the best time at this lecture, which is super nerdy. But afterwards, I'm like 18 years old. I go up to this Nobel laureate and George Akerlof, and I'm like, hey, listen, I really enjoyed your lecture. Is it possible if I could like maybe stop by your office sometime? There's some things I'd like to discuss with you, some ideas about some of your work. And he's like, yeah. So I send him an email, the next Monday. He says, come by, I'd love to meet with you. I go and see him. Over the course of my 4 years at Georgetown, I'd periodically check in with George, and he would give me a ton of great advice. When I wrote my first book, he wrote something for the back that I was able to publish on the back as sort of a review. When I applied to law school, he wrote a letter of recommendation for me. The elite colleges can create such great opportunities, can foster such unique opportunities for people. It's not that I think that these are bad institutions that have nothing to offer the world. I think they have so much to offer the world. I just think it's bad that we're sort of shielding their ability to have the biggest impact they can from so many students that could make so much with it. And that's sort of the point of this book. That's the point of this critique. I don't want to, savage the schools. I want to save them.
Yeah. The hyper exclusionary aspect of it is basically the main crux of the argument.
That's right.
We have two questions around cost, and I think one of them makes more sense in analyzing these the schools that we're not talking about, and more talking about, because obviously you're coming on in kind of the wake of this student debt forgiveness and whatnot. So a lot of the student debt is acquired by people that aren't going to these schools necessarily.
Yeah, that's right.
So I see the question, so I'm not ignoring it in chat, but it's just not necessarily applicable to some of these schools that we're talking about. But how would you posit, I guess, the impact of having tuition-free public schools or universities and my proposal is for every single state in the country to have at least one tuition-free public school option for a functional public option in every single state, plus community colleges being a functional public option as well. Do you think having these options, it doesn't have to be my version of it, would impact at all the cost of this, or is this artificial scarcity just going to keep going and going and going?
Yeah. So actually, let me take a step back and sort of address something that I don't think I did a good job of articulating, which is that I think the elite colleges actually do have a very big impact on other schools. So how does that happen? So the elite colleges basically control the norms in higher education, right? All the professors want to work there. They set the bar, they set the standards, and most importantly, they exercise the most influence over the rankings regime. They basically, work very, very closely with the U.S. News. The U.S. News basically models its regime to make sure that the already prestigious schools, sort of finish near the top. And so there's this weird incestuous relationship between these two things. But the fact of the matter is, the U.S. News rankings don't just change the behavior at the elite schools; they change the behavior everywhere. So whatever criteria the U.S. News rankings prioritize, which is inspired and in large part influenced by the elite colleges, that ends up leading to this contagion across the board. So what happened, and one of the things that has happened over the last 20, 30 years, why have other schools gotten so expensive? Or, for example, why has a UVA increased the proportion of students it takes from international countries as opposed to in-state people who pay the taxes which support UVA? What's happened is the rankings have incentivized schools to become more rejective and spend more per student. And it's sort of interacted weirdly with these state level regulations, which cap the amount you can charge for in-state students. So what a lot of public schools have done is they've gone to international areas to recruit Chinese students or Indian students or students from other countries, Europe, to come and take these slots at our, most prestigious and even less prestigious public colleges and universities. I had a friend who went to the University of Illinois, very, very strong computer science program at that school. If you know the venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, he was there when they were like at the forefront of developing the internet. This school has increased the proportion of foreign students dramatically. UVA, similar story. Berkeley, similar story. If you look at public college after public college, the number of international students keeps going up. Less and less students in state are getting the opportunity to go. And so this is a big part of this contagion story. On top of that, at the students who are within the United States and go to public colleges that aren't within their own state, the ones who pay out-of-state tuition, the reason prices are going up is partly because of what the rankings criteria have incentivized. A lot of the times the boards of trustees at these universities are appointed by the governor. The governor wants to look good. He wants to show that they're climbing in the rankings so you can say it in the stump speech. And so there's these super short-sighted incentives that have basically led to all of the illnesses of the elite colleges being transmitted into the public colleges. This is part of the reason why this distortive monopoly at the top has sort of created these like mini cartels, mini scarcities at every other level below. And so I think by fixing what's happening with the rankings, what's happening with the top schools, we can actually do something on a lot of what's wrong with all the other levels of colleges, which is what's driving so much of the student debt crisis. I actually think there is a big linkage here that I might not have articulated previously. On your second question about this idea of like public options, we have public options. We have these great schools like UVA in Virginia, where I'm from, or Illinois or Berkeley or UCLA or UT Austin. I mean, these are fantastic. Michigan, these are fantastic, awesome schools. Can they be made tuition free? Probably, right? But and this is sort of on my breaking up the endowments point, is if we can like fix the rankings regime so that we're incentivizing the right thing, if we can break up the endowments and really well resource a lot of public colleges and create more of these well resourced schools, then you can have two things happen in parallel. The cost to graduate a student can come down at the same time as resources increase. And I think that's sort of the silver bullet for a lot of what's happening in the college sector, which is we need to figure out a way to bring down the cost per student, which should have been happening over the last 30 years. And this is the last point I'll make. You know, if you think about like what's changed most in our economy over the last 30 years, this idea of like, you know, the information revolution, the internet, things like this, right? Like Zoom, anyone has access to all this information. Um, and yet, if you go to any college, including the most elite schools, and you walk in, you sit down in a classroom, it's hard to tell you're not in like the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century. It's the same method of teaching. It's these lectures, it's these exams. Maybe there's some design things that have changed in the sense of what these seats look like. Maybe there's less wood, more cushion, but essentially it's the exact same model. And there's been so little innovation, again, because it's been so monopolized, and there's been such a weird market structure in a lot of these areas. And so I think by reversing a lot of these things, there's going to be a lot of cost efficiencies that we can find. If there was actual competition, people would be looking for that stuff. They'd be trying to innovate. This is what happens in so many other sectors. I think that's what needs to happen in college. I think it will change the complete dynamic of, can we afford tuition-free public college? I think we can if we fix what we mean by college, by what we're trying to offer.
Oh, we can, not to put words in, I'm not putting words in
Yeah.
your mouth, but we definitely can afford it. It's the political will, and it's a choice, and then doing it in tandem to do what you're saying. And that's why I think it's an interesting dynamic, and why I wanted to talk with you about this stuff is because it's not just the same old, okay, not that what I have to say is the same old necessarily, but talking about, you know, I went to Penn State, and we had someone in chats give a shout out to the University of Texas. These like publics, and Penn State's a pseudo public school. It's not really a public school, but these like things exist. But like Penn State's like $50,000 a year. Like not even
Right.
like that's the not even close on the affordability scale. And
Right.
yeah, it takes a political will. It takes someone to take that bold action and take that step and take that jump. But that was an easy hour. I do want to let you run, but before you go, where can people find you, whether it be on your website or social media, and tell anybody watching / listening where they can find you and your new book come December, I
December.
think. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So my book is going to be called the College Cartel. It's coming out in December. You can find me. I don't have a big following yet, but you can find me on Twitter at Sahaj Sharda, and I'll send you that, and maybe you can put it up in the description. But I think the most important thing you could do is go to breakthecartel.com and sign this petition to demonstrate that you're against price fixing in the elite college context, and you want Congress not to resume this exemption, this from antitrust laws that elite colleges have sort of relied on to gorge students. That would be an amazing thing if you could do that. It's something that people in Congress do pay attention to, which is, do any of these issues even get any traction? The more traction they get, the more scared they get, especially as we get close to an election. And so, you know, you could have a huge impact just by signing it, sharing it with a couple of people in your family or amongst your friends. And it could really change, you know, at least at the margin, how much a student pays by tens of thousands of dollars. So please do take the time to do that.